Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. Please visit our website, cscatlanta.org, for a complete list of live and recorded events. We invite you to sign up for our newsletter to stay connected to all future programs.
Welcome. Happy to see everybody here today. Always happy to see familiar faces and always excited to see new folks. So today we are talking about sort of fall appetizers. These things could work well for a tailgate, for a game day spread, if you will, and can lend in a lot of different directions. Very, very versatile. So we're going to start with pizza beans, which is a recipe that I kind of liken it to baked ziti, but with beans instead of pasta. This is not a recipe that I developed. It is by a very well-known old school food blogger named Deb Perelman that runs a website called Smitten Kitchen, and her recipes are very well tested, very well written, and I highly recommend. So I made one small little tweak to this, but the credit goes to Deb Perelman for that recipe. And then we're gonna head down here and talk about applesauce. I'm super excited that it's apple season. You know, you can, in this modern globalized world, you can get apples, of course, all year round, but when the new crop comes in, you are reminded that there is really a difference, right? If you've been eating the apples from last year and then you get the new crop apples, you're like, whoa, all right. So I'm gonna show you how to make applesauce without having to think too much about applesauce, or a recipe, just sort of how you can kind of go at it, especially if you are at a farmer's market and you buy any sort of like scratch and dent, or you go apple picking and you're like, holy moly, we went wild with the picking, and now what am I gonna do with all these? And then we're gonna transition that into how you can turn that applesauce into a goat cheese spread. Let's get started with pizza beans. We are gonna start with a sort of medium level heat on our pan here. All right, so those of you who have hung out with me before, we've talked a lot about various methods of chopping vegetables, and one remind people about is just a really easy way to chop onions. I did a little pre-prep and chopped some of the onion already. But anytime you're working with a round vegetable, as soon as possible, you want to try to give yourself a flat surface. So cutting that onion in half, root to stem, is going to give you a nice flat surface. And then if you peel back the stem end layers just a little bit, but not necessarily take them all the way off, then you've given yourself a handle, which is nice. And so from there, we're going to take off this funky end. And there's a couple of different ways that people recommend this. But basically, you're going to sort of follow these lines of the onion in a rainbow, right? Sort of diagonally pointing towards the middle. Now, some chefs are going to start or then go with like a sort of cross this way. I skip that step for several reasons. Number one, I don't find it's necessary. And number two, it's more dangerous. So if you're, if somebody shows you a different way and that feels good to you, do it a different way. But this is the way I like to do it. So from here, now because the onion already has those layers in between, you've got a nice dice right here, ready to go. And then usually when it gets towards this end, I sort of tip it to give myself a little bit more flat surface area and kind of work around, and then flip it back down to get the last of it. And then if you need a mince, if you need something more fine than this, of course, you can go to town on it from here. But yeah, it's really that simple. So we're gonna get a little bit of oil in our pan. We want to be careful with the heat of our, I am using olive oil. We want to be thoughtful about the heat on that. And this induction burner goes real fast, but we're going to cool it down with some onions right away. All right, so we're just gonna give those a little bit of head start. The other thing that I have in this bowl right here is kale stems. And in the ones that I made last night, I didn't chop up the kale stems, but today I was just feeling like no waste sort of situation. So I'll talk about the kale stems. Yeah, you can certainly eat kale stems if they're not huge and overly woody. I don't tend to use them in salads, but in something that's going to be cooked down like this, why not? And it's just going to give you a little more fiber, a little more green nutrients in there. I do, if I am cooking the stems in something, like to give it a bit of a head start ahead of the leaves. So I'll put it in with my other aromatics. All right, so then we've also got a couple of stalks of celery. And again, the vegetables, like all of the recipes that I share with you, this is adaptable, right? If you don't have celery, that's okay, right? If you want to add some zucchini or yellow squash, go to town, right? Overall, this is a super adaptable recipe, but it's just sort of like using what you like in there. This part is the primary sort of like cooking part of these vegetables. All right, let's talk a little bit about kale. Any kind of kale would work here. Lacinato kale or dinosaur kale is the one that I happen to choose today. I find that the easiest way to deal with kale, some people will lay them up and cut them. I just run my fingers down the stem until you've got them separated. My mom used to like to buy me like little unitasker kitchen tools, and I think she gave me something one time that you're supposed to like stick it in to pull it off, and I'm like, it's right here. If I'm cutting up kale stems, I usually like to cut them so they're all about the same size, and then these thicker end ones, I'm even gonna give a further slice through. Kale and collard stems can be, you know, kind of chewy and woody. You just give it a little extra slice down the middle, and then we're just gonna get them into a mince just like we did everything else, and I'll go ahead and get this in the pan. All right, so from here, kale stems. You can tear them up into pieces, as big or as little as you like. It's not really precious. You can give them a chop if you want to. I do find if you chop them into kind of smaller pieces, then you'll get kind of better distribution throughout. I think the ones last night, I didn't chop the pieces as much, so I hope everyone gets a bite with some kale in it. All right, so we're starting to get a little brown on the bottom of this pan. I am gonna splash just a little, at this point, just a little of this liquid in here and deglaze the pan a little bit early. Okay, so the recipe says that you could use 1/4 cup of wine, and you could use 1/4 cup of wine. If you are not a wine drinker and you don't keep wine around in your house, do not worry. 50-50 ratio of white wine vinegar, red wine vinegar with water, and you're gonna be in good shape. It's gonna be delicious. I used sherry vinegar today, 50-50, 2 tablespoons of that and 2 tablespoons of water. And it's just gonna add a little brightness, a little acidity. That's what the wine is doing. So garlic. Many of you guys have seen me do my vinaigrette method where I mash my garlic into sort of a paste. I don't find that's necessary here. In fact, in a recipe like this where I really like the experience of having a nice burst of garlicky flavor, I don't get too precious about how tiny my garlic gets. So I'm gonna cut that root bit off, give it a smash with the side of my knife. If you had kids hanging out with you, it's a really good task to hand them the garlic clove and get them to peel it because it's tedious and annoying, and it makes them feel, it's like they can like stick with it for a little while. At least my daughter likes to. You're like, I don't have to worry about you with a knife. So yeah, I'm not gonna go much smaller than this. It's sort of personal preference, but I think, you know, good garlicky flavor in there it's gonna get cooked, so you're not gonna get like a big bite of raw garlic. Even if you don't have something like wine or vinegar, even a little splash of water in here will grab all that good caramelized flavor and get it into your dish. Don't leave it in the pan. All right, so we're gonna get a little salt in here. And you could do black pepper, or I'm doing a little bit of crushed red pepper. All right, so let's get our kale in here. We're gonna get, you know, everything that we're adding, we're just gonna give it a chance to get a little bit more of a head start thing after it. So you really just wanna make sure your kale gets coated in the fat and the moisture in here, and it'll start to wilt after just a minute or so. While we're letting that go for just a minute, let's talk about the beans. I'm sure a question I'm anticipating already is, can I use this kind of bean or that kind of bean, or what other kind of beans can I use? And the answer is whatever kind of bean you like. I think a white bean is a really great application here. It makes a lot of sense. It sort of goes with an Italian culinary tradition. Today I am using a can. They have this variety of Italian butter beans at DeKalb Farmers Market, and they're really very large. You get a lot of beans from Rancho Gordo. Rancho Gordo sells Royal Corona beans, which are a really big butter bean. I think that is what Deb Perelman used when she first created this dish. So if you get your hands on some of those, that would be awesome. And then we're gonna get our crushed tomatoes. You can use tomato sauce, you can use crushed tomatoes, you can buy whole tomatoes and squish them up in your hands, or smash them in the can. You just want to get some good tasty tomatoes. San Marzanos are a great choice. They're a really flavorful, delicious Italian tomato. Another good option is this Muir Glen brand. Is grown in California and just definitely has a really great flavor. Okay, so at this point, right, things are pretty well cooked in here. And you can kind of assess at this point how much liquid you want or don't want in this, right? Just like lasagna or baked ziti, right? You don't want it to be sort of soup in your bowl, but you also don't want it to be all dried up. Concentrate a little bit in the oven. But really, once we get in the oven, all you're doing is mostly just like browning everything. That's what you're trying to get, that cheesy brown on top. So you have an option, if it feels like it's too dry, to add some stock to it, vegetable stock, chicken stock, whatever stock, or even just a little bit of water if you want. I'm liking where this is right now. The other thing that you might notice is that depending on what kind of can of tomatoes you use, there is massively wide variability in how liquidy a can of tomatoes is. So if your tomatoes are really liquidy and you don't want it to be so liquidy, just cook it and reduce it for a little while before you get it in that pan. Get it to about where you want it to be, knowing it is gonna concentrate up and reduce a little bit in the oven, but not a lot of it. You want it to be mostly where you want it to be, 80–90% of the way in the pot. So I feel like this is good. It's not gonna like slide off a plate if I were to serve it on a plate. We're just gonna get it right in this dish. I would probably use a like 9×13, 3-quart baking dish. This is probably a 2-quart baking dish because it's what we had. Got it all in there, and then we're just gonna combination of mozzarella cheese and Parmesan cheese. And you just wanna get it, how you like it. As much cheese or as little cheese as your heart's desire. I like the combination. The mozzarella, of course, gives you the stretchiness and the gooiness, and the Parmesan is going to be saltier and sort of sharper flavored, and so a combination is nice. All right, there we go. From there, you've got a couple of options in your oven. You can go 475, preheat your oven to 475. Just let it go low and slow. If you're in a bit of a hurry, remember everything that we have put at the bottom of this is already cooked. So you can just throw it under the broiler until things get, it also kind of depends on how much of that like brown, crispy, crunchy, cheesy top you want versus just more of a gentle melt. Choose your own adventure. I personally am very partial to that like brown, crispy, crunchy edge. When I was a kid, if my mom made like a potatoes au gratin casserole or anything with sort of cheese on the edge, my dessert was to like scrape off the baked on cheese off the edge of the casserole dish. I was like, hand me the pan, I'm gonna work on this. All right, switching gears over to applesauce. How many of you guys have made applesauce before? Couple people. It's crazy easy, right? It's so easy. So the way I wrote this recipe is one of the ways I love to write recipes, which is how to make applesauce without a recipe. You don't need a recipe for applesauce. So let's talk about our apple choice. I chose 3 different varieties of apple today. I've got Pink Ladies. These are my all-time favorites. I think they have a really good balance of acidity and sweetness and nice and crisp. Honeycrisp, right? This is now like America's darling apple, and it's also super delicious. And then for applesauce, I do like some acidity in it, so we threw a green Granny Smith in here as well. You can do whatever you want. You can make all of it all the same variety of apple juice you want. I kind of like the sort of like more complex flavor that you're going to get from a mixture of apples. The other thing about applesauce that I love is that if you want to peel your apples, you can peel your apples. But if you don't want to peel your apples, you don't have to. Because you can just blend it all down. So I'm just going to go right around this core. So because you can also throw a little bit of liquid or a little bit of acid. This pan is hot, so I'm going to go ahead and get some lemon juice in there. So that was just 5 minutes under the broiler. All right, so with applesauce, really all you've got to do is just cook down these apples. It takes, depending on how small you cut them, 15 minutes or so. And from here, at this point, you can, oh, I have one more apple. You can start thinking about flavorings. You can start thinking about what you're gonna do with your applesauce, right? Are you a ginger person? Are you a cinnamon and cardamom and baking spice sort of person? Vanilla is a fun direction. Are you going to blend it with other fruits like, peaches or plums or something like that? You've got all sorts of options. At this point, you could throw, a cinnamon stick in there as it cooks if you want. I usually wait until it's cooked down to decide if it needs any additional sweetener. Because depends on what kind of varieties you chose and how sweet your apples are. But we're just gonna let those, I did give it a little bit of lemon juice in there, but we're just gonna let it hang out for a little while. While we let that hang out, we're gonna talk a little bit about this goat cheese spread. So I started thinking about ways to use applesauce. So my daughter definitely likes it just like swirled into a bowl of yogurt with granola for breakfast or just to eat it plain, and I think that is delicious, or on waffles or something like that. We're getting close to, we're not getting close to yet. It's very traditional in the Jewish tradition to have applesauce with potato latkes, and that can be sort of a more warm application for applesauce, which is nice. We talked earlier about baking spices, but herbs can be another fun direction to go with applesauce, especially if you're going to do something savory. So sort of thinking about the combination of goat cheese and applesauce and sort of how to make a dip or a spread. So this is super simple. I've got just plain goat cheese and then mascarpone. Mascarpone is an Italian cream cheese. It's kind of a softer cream cheese. Goat cheese is spreadable, but and you can whip it up on its own. I just sort of thought the mascarpone combination would make for a nice spread. So we're gonna do equal parts, roughly, goat cheese and mascarpone. If you don't want to go with mascarpone, you could go with cream cheese or Neufchâtel. We're just gonna whip them together until you've got a nice smooth blend. And then once our applesauce is ready, we're just gonna add in enough applesauce until we're happy with what we have. And that is highly variable and definitely up to you. So we really just want to get this all incorporated together. All right, so at this point we've kind of got this like sort of cold butter, softened butter kind of level. It's not like fully whipped yet, and it's sort of crumbly looking. And that is good because when we add the applesauce to it, we're going to add moisture. So the other thing I was thinking about with applesauce that that perhaps people haven't tried is adding culinary herbs to it. So I've got some thyme here today that we're going to add. And picking thyme can be a little tedious, but when you can find a good sort of sturdy stem and run your finger down it, what's funny about thyme is that like usually the bottom of the stalk is the woodier part, and it'll stay intact, but the top part of it is kind of floppy. So if you do like 3/4 of the way down, you're probably going to be able to run your whole finger down it and get it off, and then then I like work my way back up to the top. Inevitably, probably 70 or 85% of the time, if I try to start all the way at the top, see where it's floppy, I will break it. Throw that in there, and then we'll take a peek at applesauce and see how things are going. I thought about doing sage last year. I think I did something where I fried sage, and I thought about doing that today, but I didn't. I'm just going to use thyme today. Okay, so sage fried in olive oil is really fun. And I can't remember what I did it with last year. I did it here last year. Does anybody remember what I put it on? So you want your olive oil to be, below the smoke point, so get it to, medium heat, and, enough so that it covers, and you could do it in a neutral flavored oil as well that has a higher smoke point. But enough oil so that, a sage leaf will sort of float on top of it. So even just like maybe 1/2 inch or something, you don't need a ton of oil, but just so it's going to fully coat the bottom of the pan, because those sage leaves fry in like a couple of seconds. It's like, tss, tss, pull it out, and then they are crispy. Yeah, and that is delicious. My son, I will always just do extra, and then sprinkle a little salt on it or something like that. So if you were doing something fancy and kind of appetizer-y, and you wanted to make this goat cheese applesauce spread, and maybe you want to pipe it onto a cracker and put a little fried sage leaf on top, if you just have all the time in the world for making cute little canapes, then there you go. There's your idea. For the rest of us who are just like, just put it all together and eat it with a cracker out of the bowl standing over the sink, I salute you. Okay, so we've got a combination of apples that are getting soft at the bottom and ones that are still whole at the top. So I'm going to give this a little bit more time. And I actually think because we've got pizza beans ready, let's switch it up a little bit. We'll go ahead and serve pizza beans. All right, so game back on. If we look over here at our stovetop, right, our apples have turned to the mush that we want for applesauce. So all we've got to do from here is stick an immersion blender in it, or a stick blender. So peels are still in there. There's a little bit of lemon juice in there, and that's it. Otherwise, it's just the liquid from the apples cooking down. And so the point that you decide to stop is, again, up to you. Do you like a chunkier rustic applesauce, or do you want it to be silky smooth? If you want it like all the way silky smooth, even with the peels in there, I would say throw it in a blender, right? And just like go to town. If you want it a little bit more rustic chunky, which I think is nice in this application, then you can, stop at any time. I'm gonna give it a little taste and see. So this is the point that I would assess. Does it need a little bit more acid? Does it need a little bit of sweetener? Does it need a little pinch of salt? All of that sort of stuff. And again, this is fully personal preference. This is where you get to decide exactly how you like it. Yeah, so at this point, I would put just a little bit of honey and a little bit of salt, but it's gonna be pretty minor. So probably yay. And then a little pinch of salt. And we will just stir that in. So I don't want it to taste salty. I love the description of salt is that salt makes things taste more like themselves. And so that's all I'm really looking for here, is just like a little bit of amplification, if that makes sense. And then you're also wanting balance. So, you want to balance in all of your dishes, saltiness and sweetness and sweetness, and acidity, and even bitterness if it's that type of dish. Above all, you just want it to taste very apple-y, right? Okay, so we're gonna go just probably like a quarter of a cup at a time into this until we've got something smooth, and again, we're gonna taste it. And again, you get to decide, do you want it to be a cheesier dip? Do you want it to be a fruitier dip? Do you want it to be applesauce with a little goat cheese in it, or do you want it to be goat cheese with a little applesauce in it? 50-50, you decide. You can already see how much more liquidy this is now. And I'm good with a little peel in here because that's sort of the vibe I'm going for, is a little bit more rustic. I will say the more applesauce and liquid that you add to it, the less dip-like it will be. It'll get a little soupy. So I would start small and add as you go. So at this point now, again, we're gonna think about salt. We're gonna think about, does it have enough of the thyme the way I want it to taste? I think I want a little bit more applesauce in there because I want that appleiness to shine through. And this is also where we want to model and remind people that, cooking is sort of like ingredients are not precise and exact. Like when you're baking, of course, you want to follow recipes to a point, but even that, there's like opportunities for improvisation, and tasting and adjusting is part of the skill of cooking, of course. It's not like getting it perfect every time without adjusting. Well, we're gonna get this dip plated up for you. And we can also do a little applesauce on the side as well, so you can just take the applesauce by itself. Yeah, I hope that you guys will make some pizza beans and take advantage of apple season, whether it's making applesauce or just, eating apples of this fresh crop. I always get excited about enjoying the new stuff that's coming every season when it comes to food, because it's sad when one thing ends, but you're like, but it'll come back, and then I'll be excited next year, right? Peach season is over. We are sad peach season is over, but apple season is here. Unless you got frozen peaches, and then you don't have to be so sad. All right, keep eating and keep enjoying. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining Cancer Support Community Atlanta for this program. If you're interested in other live or recorded programs, please visit the online program tab of our website, cscatlanta.org, or follow us on Facebook. We'll be sharing additional information on upcoming programs.